Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist. You're going to love this. If you love love, you're going to love this.
Yes, what he said. So how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's episode is called The Intimacy Ladder. And so I
love the intimacy ladder.
Yeah. You talked about this a few times during the podcast, and we never really fully dived into it. And for me, I thought it would be good to talk about because the more I learn about intimacy from you and how you view it from the people you've learned from seems to be like the secret sauce of a relationship. And
yeah, I think I've grown more and more fond of that weird, nerdy word algorithm, but I think there's so many really simple algorithms that could help all of us navigate intimacy in a way that's far more enjoyable. So I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really know what intimacy was until I thought about it. Like you said, you watched that show with the judge, and the judge says to the people, "Have you been intimate together?"
Oh, the old Perry Masons from back in the early 60s, where not just the judge, but the defense attorney, Perry Mason, and his arch nemesis, the district attorney, they would both at critical times in the drama lean forward and say, "Is it true that you and the defendant have been intimate?" And, for the time in the 60s and as a little boy watching this, I found myself going, yeah, I mean, that was unremarkable. I thought it was code for sexual intercourse.
And it was probably back then. Right?
Oh, and it still is for millions of people in America. But I think when we make it simply mean only that one thing, we miss out on a far more helpful view of the word, because it's a useful word in terms of defining the ability to safely share my life with another person, with its various subcategories, and there are at least 10, including things like intellectual intimacy. Sometimes a teacher and a student connect, whether it's at the university level or even when at the high school level or below, where they're sharing ideas and there's so much excitement about the ideas, and yet it feels so safe that they can go deeper and deeper into the ideas in a way that perhaps the entire class is not interested in, and not interested in at all. Or a lot of teachers who maybe are burned out or not even excited about the material anymore. They don't wish to explore it further, or they're not excited when they see that look of enthusiasm in the eye of a student. So whether it's math or English homework, or it's something to do with social studies, it just doesn't matter. There could be intellectual intimacy, and that's followed on the heels by emotional intimacy, the ability to safely share feelings; spiritual intimacy, the ability to safely share my spirituality, which is comparable to sexuality in that we don't have to be identical to be able to be intimate. So just as with...
but that's the thing that most people don't think about.
Yes. That's why I'm bringing it up. And I think for a lot of people, the irrational belief that's been taught in a lot of religions is that you must be of the same religion in order to have spiritual intimacy. And really nothing could be further from the truth, because making it safe to share our spirituality with one another might involve a lot of overlap in our beliefs, or very little overlap in our beliefs, other than a belief in the ethos that it should be safe for one another to share our beliefs. And I think that heterosexuals see this clearly when it comes to sexuality, right? Where she has different genitalia than he does, and that's for both of them. As heterosexuals, that's an important part of the exchange of sexual intimacy. And by sexual intimacy, I'm not specifying intercourse again, but simply being able to talk about sexuality and share my history or my feelings or my thoughts regarding sexuality. That I think that could be something that in my office, I've worked with a lot of groups of men who share, thoughts about sexuality, and they have a great deal of sexual intimacy, but that doesn't mean that they're sexually involved with one another. Mm-hmm. It just means that, we're in a room where it's safe to talk and people are taking risks and opening up. And that's kind of the heart and soul of therapy, isn't it?
Yeah. And going back to the spiritual intimacy, that's something that I don't even think religions promote.
Oh, no. Quite the contrary, right? For most religions, the idea, I think, frankly, this is going to get us some harsh emails.
But I want to get the emails.
But the idea is really more about market share than it is anything else. Uh-huh. So having believers in the church or the mosque or the synagogue mating and dating with other believers, producing more believers in their children, that's the goal rather than promoting intimacy. So it's really about garnering market share more than anything else.
So if you're religious and I was Catholic and I was married to, or I was dating a Christian, then if I was like, well, Catholicism is the answer. And she's like, well, Christianity is the answer.
Oh, she was a Protestant.
Or whatever. Either.
Yeah, whatever.
There's something different.
Don't you get it, Jason?
It's one of those things that's not even worth to occupy my brain, like religion.
Well, it would be, for me, I used to be that guy who needed to be exactly the same or tried to be exactly the same as my partner. And I would only date, a certain class of women who believed as I did, or at least seemed to. But I think I made a horrible error in that, because now that I understand intimacy, I could very easily have dated a comfortable believer from a different religion or someone who believes in no religion, as long as the whole goal, though, in any kind of romance would be safely enjoying, sharing, getting to know one another.
Yeah.
And I wish somebody had explained that to me decades ago, and I would have had a lot more fun dating, because sometimes the differences really make for a more intriguing, engaging sort of relationship. Because, well, I think it's self-evident why that's true. But for a lot of churches and religions in general, the fear is that this other person will pull you away from your faith. And it's like, well, if that's the only thing that's keeping me in my faith, then it can't really be doing me all that much good, because if it were doing me all that much good, I wouldn't give it up for anyone.
Yeah. So let me give you a better example. So I'm an atheist and my wife is a Christian.
Oh.
And
but you're not married.
No, we're not. We'll say we're dating. And
this is a thought experiment.
Just a thought experiment. So
okay. I thought you got married since the last time we talked.
No, not yet. Maybe never. I don't know. So anyways, so I'm an atheist. I'm dating a Christian. It's like the Christian, I would think, like, I don't know. I feel like most common people, or I don't know, that's like an insult. Even me.
Unlike we in the nobility, well, commoners.
Well, even back,
we got to edit all this out.
Yeah, they'll enjoy it. But I'm saying, like, even like me a few years ago, I would think that. I was like, well, I can't imagine being in a relationship with a Christian or
a religious person.
It's like that was like a thing for me, like spiritual. Like, I'm like, we have to be somewhat aligned, because especially if my girlfriend wanted to go to church, and I'm like, then I don't want to go to church. But I think it takes it's like a next level to be able to separate that and allow both people to be free, because the woman, I would imagine, the guy wants whatever the religious person would probably want that person to go with them.
Perhaps that would be fun to share that, but it's kind of like going to anything that's really deeply meaningful. You get to come home and tell your stories.
Yeah. Well, that takes, I think, a height in love. You have to be at like another level, like consciously or intellectually or however you want to put it, in order to do that. Because most people be like, I'm not me. It's like, and then they're like, oh, what am I going to go tell my friends? Like, oh, where's John at? Well, John's an atheist. What? you're dating? How dare you? You know, it's like I think that's the more of the common thing. I think this is the more uncommon thing, but the uncommon should be common.
Well, yeah, I don't think we'll ever go broke betting on the idea that America is way too healthy. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I said that the opposite way of what I meant, but I think betting against America's mental health, I think we'll never go broke. Right now, it just seems obvious to me that part of appreciating another person and truly loving them is embracing the differences. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm God Almighty and I can embrace all differences, because I can't. I have limits, and there are certain things I can't tolerate. For example, I think an open marriage would be something I don't really have any interest in. And if I met a wonderful woman who was perfect in every way, but that was an important part of her life, I would, with some regret, have to let her know I'm definitely not the right guy for you then.
What part of that would be hard for you?
The open marriage thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even like I can barely tolerate visitors to my house, much less, somebody who's like up in my business. So I think for me, I wouldn't even want to share a dog, I want my dog to be my dog.
Yeah.
And I suppose there might be room for me to think about it in terms of a family dog, but I still want to have that relationship be somewhat special. And with a life partner, like a girlfriend or a wife, I think I would crave that sort of exclusivity. And yeah, so for me,
craving the exclusivity.
Yeah, I think that it has its own merits, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a time to share and there's a time to have exclusivity. And for me, part of my life that I enjoy is privacy, and being able to safely share my private thoughts and life with another is something that I believe should be highly structured and intentionally built. And having some other stranger kind of roll into that who's been picked or self-anointed, picked by my partner or self-anointed, that's not really something that would interest me.
Yeah. And then he like calls you like Stevie or Steve-O. Oh, Stevie.
Well, you can just, I can just think about so many romantic comedies that would be hilarious, right? With that kind of misery where somebody's trying to accommodate the woman he loves, or vice versa. And I would be more like Sterling Archer's mother, when she announced in, I think it was season 5, that she was going to have an open marriage with her partner. And
what show is this?
It was in Archer.
Oh, Archer. Okay.
And she is, and just then the phone belonging to a beautiful young woman standing next to this middle-aged woman, the phone rings and it's her husband, hitting on this young woman who gets a very seductive, hello, Ron. and Sterling Archer's mother, Mallory, just knocks her out right there on the spot. And that was the end of that. So I'd be more like inclined to feel the same way, like resentful, not so much territorial. As if somebody wanted to do that, I think I'd just be the wrong partner for them.
Yeah. So intimacy comes in many forms, and it's about safety. That's what we're kind of establishing.
Sure. Like even physical intimacy is not about having sex, but it's about merely sharing physical space with someone. And even as a man, I don't always feel safe sharing physical space with other men, because sometimes people are threatening or intimidating. And even though I think I could still out-wrestle most women, I don't find all women safe for me to be in the same room with. And I think that every one of us as an adult has a responsibility for our own safety. So physical intimacy has to be earned over time, as does recreational intimacy, social intimacy, and even historical intimacy, where I'm safely sharing my history with another person. But mostly when I think about intimacy with a partner, of all the 10 different dimensions of intimacy, there's not a one I would be willing to give up. I want the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet some people scrape by for years with a limited amount of intimacy in certain areas, and they're comfortable with that. It's just not enough for me because I'm demanding and opinionated. So I want more.
What do you feel about spreading? Can you spread intimacy too thin? Like say,
oh, well, sure. If I say, let's say with friendship, where I'm sharing emotional, intellectual, and social intimacy,
mm-hmm.
And I'm sharing with my friends. Well, it's easy as long as I have 1 to 5 friends. But once I get up to about 100 friends,
mm-hmm.
It's much more challenging at that point, because I think friendship, like every other relationship, requires maintenance
mm-hmm.
and care. And so you have to service the relationship in order to keep those bonds close. And if you're trying to be equally intimate with 100 or 1,000 people, that's simply beyond our capabilities.
Yeah. It's a lot of need more time in the day for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, an author, for example, perhaps you might share in a book you're writing some deeply personal portions of your life in terms of the characters you build or the plots you consider.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all one-sided, right? I mean, the reader is reading it, but the reader isn't sharing back with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, it is a relationship of sorts between an author and a reader, but it's really very one-sided.
Yeah. So you say in relationships, the best relationship is made up of 2 parts. One is intimacy, the other is titillation.
Well, when we're talking about romantic
relationships, so shifting back to that. So
yeah, I'm not titillated by my friends. In fact, I remind them, if you looked in the mirror today, because God, you're ugly. So,
but you have the intimacy, joke intimacy.
We do have humor
intimacy.
Yeah, where it's safe, because my friends know that I love them and I care about them.
Until you betray them and stab them in the back.
Which I don't do.
Yeah.
But even with my male clients, I think it's part of male culture, right? That we kid around like that. And it's really based on the certitude that this other person has my well-being at heart.
Mm.
We couldn't do that with one another and enjoy it and relax and proceed in the relationship if we didn't have that strong belief that we were there for each other. But once it's there, I think typically men joke that way a bit more than women.
Yeah.
I don't think too many women say, "Oh, you fat whore, how you doing today?"
No. But I've had it with a friend and then no longer friends with a friend for 20 years. So that was like one of those things where it's like you go and you have that intimacy and you go in these deep levels and you think that the person has your back, and then it's like, nope. And then it's just like, wow.
Well, yeah, we make mistakes, right? Even when we're little children, starting, I suppose, when we're little children, we share our toys with people we think it's safe to share with. We're not thinking they're going to steal our toys.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find out as a little child, and Johnny Walker, I remember you, so don't think I've forgotten that you took my Hot Wheels.
That was his name, Johnny Walker?
Yeah, like named after the whiskey, yeah.
No.
So
was he really?
No.
Oh.
But if if we don't learn, we are, to that degree, we are still naive and easily taken advantage of. So we need to be working on these social skills to become ever more sophisticated. But is this really what we were talking about?
Well, I mean, we could go in little places and people could
go down some bunny trails. We're talking about laddering up intimacy, right?
Yeah, but we'll get to that.
And I think friends can do that.
Friends, yeah.
That friends, and I think a student and an instructor can do that. Mm-hmm. I think, sharing ideas that are edgier and edgier, more outside the, distant, let's say, from the accepted mainstream, to be able to talk even in a writer's workshop, let's say. I'm sure you've attended one or more of those. Mm-hmm. And there are some ideas that are very mainstream and not particularly controversial. And then there are others that I would imagine might have been poorly received and were, instrumental in getting some arguments going.
Mm-hmm.
But even that, getting arguments and conflict going, that can be in the context of a successfully intimate setting, whether it's a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship or two friends. And I would say, again, back to this, statement you've heard me make time and again, conflict is an essential part and an inevitable part of every intimate relationship. So even if I'm getting along great with a new client, if I'm doing my job, there is going to come a point where my client feels empowered enough to strongly disagree with me and to voice his disagreement. And if I don't get to that point, I haven't done my job, and my client hasn't been doing his part in terms of growing, and we're more in danger of starting some kind of weird cult where everything the cult leader says is true and right, and everything you find yourself in disagreement with is suspect in your mind because obviously you're not a true believer.
Yeah. So, going back to the relationship intimacy though. So that in a relationship, titillation and intimacy is what just creates a good relationship, right?
Right. It's founded upon those two, or at least a good sexual relationship. So every once in a while, I meet an unfortunate woman who talks about what a gentleman her husband was while they were dating, or her boyfriend. But here it is 6 years later and they're not having sex. And when I think about a gentleman being so gentlemanly that he can't admit that he has the hots for a woman, and that it's not obvious that he's restraining himself from reaching out and caressing her, then I think, he doesn't have any kind of a titillating attraction for her. And that's a problem. And I don't know if it's because, he still hasn't come out of the closet and he's gay and just trying to please his parents by getting married to a woman, because I've seen that plenty of times. Or is it because he's asexual, but he wants a partner, but he doesn't know how to navigate, disclosing the truth, or perhaps he doesn't even accept his own truth. Or, maybe there's a Madonna whore paradigm going on, and he's able to sexualize her so long as he doesn't love her. And then once he's in love with her, he's unable to continue sexualizing her. So there's so many reasons that people's sex lives get disrupted. But I think without titillation, there can't really be that animal attraction that helps us to overcome some of our cognitive obstacles, because those will occur where I just don't see how I can make a life with this person. But then you remember, but I just love holding her. Or, boy, I really want to kiss her. So that's all titillation, and it's great. But titillation alone, which many people go through as well, because they're either incapable of intimacy or they simply never learned how, it's just not on their radar. If I have titillation with no intimacy and I really don't safely get to share my life with this person, then after a while, it's like looking at the same pornographic centerfold. It's not exciting anymore. So it's, I think the abbreviation is SOP, and that doesn't stand for standard operating procedure. Like in the military, it's same old pussy. So if I'm getting, if I'm having sex with the same woman and we've had it in every conceivable position, as if she were Gumby, and I in every room of the house and in every hotel within 1,000 miles, it's like, oh my gosh, do I have to keep having sex with the same person? Well, when you have a truly intimate relationship, it isn't the same person, because she's constantly evolving and growing and changing, and we're sharing more and more deeply with one another. And so in that case, and you see this with people who've been together for decades and they're still madly, deeply in love, and they just get so excited at the idea of getting back together with their spouse, because it isn't the same person. They're constantly discovering new things about this person. And yes, a lot of the same things are still there. They're recognizably the same person, recognizably the same personality. but they're growing. And I think of my wife right now. One of the things that I found just so delightful yesterday was she had attended a Zoom meeting for candidate Kamala Harris, and there were over 100,000 women on this particular Zoom meeting, and they were being encouraged to take risks and to share more of their thoughts about politics instead of being so retiring and meek and trying to get along with everyone. And she's been doing that. And I'm looking at who is this? And she's been letting other people know that she would normally never even disclose about her own political thoughts. And I just find it so delightful that she is facing whatever small fears that she's experienced in the past or reluctance to get into any kind of controversy. And it's really rather exciting, because it is a new wrinkle on her, and in the non-physical sense, and on her personality, that is. And I think that that kind of experience happens over and over again with you and your future significant other. I'm sure she'll read a new book and she'll be talking to you about this book, even if it's a book that you would never read yourself. The impression it made on her and the thoughts it brought to her. I mean, that's exciting and that's interesting to hear, especially if it's something new for her.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to continue on intimacy, but really quick on titillation. Would you say that? So that's kind of attraction, essentially. Same.
It's arousal to physical stimuli.
Arousal to physical. So would you say that that's another reason why you dislike online dating? Because it's hard to tell. It's easier to tell in real life.
Let me answer your question with a question. Mm-hmm. Is this you arguing for full nudity on social dating apps?
No. No, I'm just saying sometimes what I've noticed sometimes with dating, it's like when you see someone out in life, it seems like you kind of know right away.
Well,
but sometimes when you see someone in a picture, it's kind of like, I don't know, but you know what I'm saying?
I do. And I've talked to men who've complained about that before, but the truth is we're animals, and it's a little bit like showing your dog a picture of another dog and asking, well, do you like this one? And I think dogs get together and they start smelling each other, mm-hmm. and they start, posturing around each other and making attempts at playing with one another. And then somebody gets grouchy and snaps at the other one, mm-hmm. or maybe they hit it off. But it's really not something one can predict, because it's about the chemistry of two beings coming together. And just because I can think of, can any of us think of any movie star over the last 50 years who wasn't gorgeous in her photos that were released for public distribution and to promote a film? Of course, they're all gorgeous. But then does that mean you would be equally attracted to all of them if you were to sit and get to know them?
Yeah.
Of course not, because they're all different people. And as you got to know them, I imagine there'd be many that you would like and many you would just have no emotional connection with at all. So biochemistry and having some chemistry together, as they used to say like 100 years ago, having some chemistry is something we can't tell from a photograph. And then we hit it off, or we don't, or sometimes you even just, they've done experiments with pheromones in painting putting a bit of pheromone from the opposite sex on the seats of a stadium. And invariably there's this high rate of men choosing seats that had female pheromones, women choosing seats that had male pheromones. And it's like, what are we to make of that? Oh yeah, we're animals. And even if we're not conscious of it, there's an algorithm in the deep structures of our brain that feels yes about one person and absolutely not about another person.
Yeah.
So, and I think that what's really great about getting away from photographs and dating apps altogether is the magic of meeting another human being is enhanced by the full presentation of self. it's hard to capture the sparkle in one's eyes or the lilt of one's voice and in a dating app.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all these charming attributes that another person might have that have absolutely no presence on a dating app. And all we're left with is a photograph. And so we might as well be flipping through photographs of, like the police show victims of violent crime. Which of these guys would you date? And the victim is flipping pages and pages and pages. And I guess that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, but they're all criminals.
Yeah.
So I don't think.
They are all criminals online.
Yeah. Well, I think dating that way is really for the incredibly shy and uninformed.
Yeah. Well, I went on 2 dates recently. We talked about this, and I don't know if it was this podcast or the other one, but I went back on online dating because I'm still not learning my lessons. I'm still, even after having these conversations, but I deleted it yesterday, and I feel like it was a fine experience. But I was like, all right, I'm off.
Yeah,
and I'm committing to not going on them ever again. And if that means that I'll be single for the rest of my life, I've committed to, I've accepted that. So it's like, that's it. That's what I kind of said. So,
well, I don't think you need my reassurance. So I won't offer any, but I do think, the strategy that you're probably going to use in the years to come is developing a life worth living and then having a great time. And the kind of women who would find a man with your looks and presentation of self attractive are going to be making it clear that there's an interest, and you two are going to have a conversation, which will lead to a cup of coffee or a walk or some time together, going out. And that's a more natural, organic way of developing a relationship, I think. And it's going to be far more successful in terms of positive outcomes.
Yeah. Well, it was in my head. It was like, whoa, what about, you can't do that. What about all the women you'll be missing out on who are online? It's like that kind of voice that pops in. But I finally think I did some work yesterday and got out of it, I think. At least I think 100%. I'm hoping 100%. I have no sight in the future. Do I see myself getting back on one?
Well, it's not like it could never happen, right? I mean, there are people we've both met who did meet their spouse online, and I lived happily ever after so far, at least. And so that can happen, but it can also happen walking into a parking lot from your car as you approach a grocery store.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't say, well, you should hang out in parking lots.
Yeah.
That would be the thinking error. Just because some people have had success in this way doesn't mean that would be ideal for the vast majority of us.
Yeah. Well, I'm liking the idea of just living my life, like just living it and living it the best that I can in a way that really excites me and that I enjoy and that's healthy for me. That seems to be a lot more exciting than swiping and writing.
So let me flip the script on you and ask you the question. So if you were living that life and meeting those women, how would you begin to establish intimacy?
I'd say, you ever hear of a ladder? I'd show them my ladder. No, I would, obviously, well, it would start with the intentional interview. It would start with that, I would believe.
But okay, so that sounds like you'd be asking them a lot of questions, more like a police interrogation. But if you're in your interview, are you, say you liked what you were hearing?
Yes.
Would you be responding?
Yeah, I would. I'm a normal person, Steve. I'm not a psycho. Yeah, I would.
That has yet to be in evidence, Your Honor.
Yeah. I would talk to them mutually. They'd share something, I'd share something back, mutual disclosures, go deeper and deeper, talk about our life, talk about what we're into, our interests, talk about everything essentially.
Well, I see a very happy future in store for you.
Yes. But going back to the ladder now, the intimacy ladder.
Yes.
But yeah, I have all the conversations with sometimes that's my problem with women. I go in too quickly and they feel very safe with me. And sometimes maybe they're just, I don't see them that way. And then next thing you know, it gets me in trouble.
So I'm a little confused about the problem, but when you say you go in too deeply, you mean you like reveal deep personal parts of yourself, like on a first, second, or third date?
If it comes up naturally, yeah. I'm pretty open book with stuff. I mean,
Do you think that was a mistake if it comes up naturally?
No.
Me either.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes it just gets. All right, let me get back to this.
What the hell are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm editing this out. No, I'm joking. So the ladder, though, intimacy. It's what I like about this idea is everyone knows what a ladder is. Simple.
We certainly hope so.
But ladders end mostly. There's no ladder that goes to infinity. But intimacy ladder is a ladder that goes, it never ends. It's a ladder it's not 6 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet. It's endless.
Unending.
An unending level. And that is what, again, sustains the relationship. And that means, like, how do you explain that idea? Like that this ladder is forever and that the higher you go, the better it gets, it seems to be.
Yeah. I don't, if we're talking about your dating or anybody listening to this dating, I don't think there's any need to explain it. But for me, it's a guide as an individual if I were dating to maybe be okay with starting slow. Mm-hmm. In contrast, I've had clients who, they would meet somebody they found very attractive and exchange names. And I'm not kidding when I say, and then within the first minute, disclose, you don't want to date somebody like me. Oh, why wouldn't I want to date somebody like you? Oh, I just got out of prison after 20 years. Oh, what were you in for? And then he says murder or rape or whatever it is. And she says, so you're still single? Mm-hmm. And that's a horrible scenario, but I have had clients who have had that happen. And it's no normal person proceeds under, with an introduction just like that.
Yeah. I don't do that, by the way.
And nor have you been in prison ever.
No.
And so for me, a more natural thing, it would be something like, let's say you're on a date with someone enjoying an activity like, I don't know, ballroom dancing or a movie that you both agreed to go to, or even a restaurant, and one of you shares, I really like this fill in the blank restaurant, movie, or I really like ballroom dancing. Mm-hmm. And the other person says, me too. Okay, so you both exchanged some information, and it doesn't have to be a mutual admiration society. It could be, I don't know, I'm not sure I did like that movie. Mm-hmm. And then, but that's also very vulnerable, right? And so I've opened up at a level commensurate with the disclosure of the other person. So the two of us are gently meeting each other at these less risky levels of the ladder. And if we can safely disagree on the movie, like it's okay for me to not like the movie she just loved, or vice versa, if that's okay, then I might even move on to another level. And
go up another rung.
Yeah, another rung of the ladder.
But if it's not really quick, if it becomes a thing, then the ladder
If
ends.
It becomes a very uncomfortable moment because I don't love this craft fair as much as she does. Mm-hmm. And
she's upset.
Yeah, and she gets upset because I remind her in that moment of her ex, or for some reason she takes it personally and is offended. And this could happen the other way around, right? When you take her to your favorite pawn shop and you're showing her all the hand tools that are.
It's my favorite first date. Let's go to the pawn shop.
See what's on sale. Uh-huh. But whatever it is, if it's okay for the other person to not enjoy it or not enjoy it in the same way that you enjoy it, I think that opens things up instead of, well, it's not something we're compatible about, going to the pawn shop or going to that kind of craft fair or movie. But how wonderful it is that we both felt free to be different and to enjoy that, because two people who are reasonably bright should be able to figure out that just because one of us likes doing something doesn't mean we both have to have that in order to have a successful relationship.
And what if that was the case where somebody got upset? Is that grounds for like, well, this isn't going to work for me sort of thing? Because if you're looking to go up the ladder to the infinite sky where it reaches to, and you're already getting blocked there.
I would, I want to say I probably have a number of listeners who would expect me to say that, but I would say I don't want to give up that easily. And so for me, I would...
A little twist.
Yeah, I would want to say, hey, hold on. Just because you like something and I don't, doesn't mean I'm not the best guy you've ever dated and the perfect partner for you in the future. It just means we're two human beings who have some things in common and some things that are different. Well, what do we have in common? Well, I think you're amazing, and then you put on the charm and you've got all these things in common. Like I enjoy spending time with you. I enjoy hearing what you have to say about different subjects. I just don't care to be in this particular venue or this particular activity. And I think learning to safely navigate the differences is part of really falling in love. So that's why I think it's important for people to not give up, and not be so wimpy as to encounter like one difference between the two of us, or even 10 differences between the two of us. I like nature and the outdoors. My wife likes nature and the outdoors, but in a completely different way. So I virtually never do any of the things she does outdoors, and she never does any of the things I do outdoors.
But you have intimacy around that where it's okay. But what if it's not? What if it's not okay?
Like, it's safe for us to be different, and we come back and share our experiences with each other, and it's wonderful.
But what if you're dating this person? It's not safe because she likes the movie, you don't, and that's a problem. You give her another chance. And then it's like another thing happens like that. And then another thing happens like that. And then it's like, okay, after every time that happens, I tell her she's amazing, she's great. But now it's like, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, now we have 10 things with no common ground.
To where it's not safe to even, it's like, oh, you want to go hike again? Okay, whatever.
Yeah, loser. Fine. No, I hate hiking. I think for me, it is ultimately about safely accepting each other. And if we're not safe, I think this is also important too, is to understand I can safely accept a lot of women who are very different from me, but because we don't have any common ground, we wouldn't be reasonably good partners for each other. But we still have intimacy.
Yeah.
So it's really about how we handle the commonalities and the differences, whether we can enjoy them and let that be a part of the relationship or not. And I mean both the differences and the commonalities. So is it safe? And if it's not safe, that's a problem. And that's the problem I would want to talk to my potential partner about, is what makes it not okay that I don't like this?
And that's what you'd ask that question.
I would put it right out there and confront her about that. And she might say, let's say she's extremely unsophisticated and she says, what do you mean? In some sort of aggressive way. And I would say, that right there, that's what I mean. I'm trying to open up to you and share something with you, and you're jumping my shit like there's something really wrong with me, or that you think there's something wrong with you. And I don't. I think we're both okay. We're just a little different when it comes to, let's say, even voting differently.
What if she's like, well, I want a guy who
blah,
blah, blah.
Then I'm not the right guy for you.
Oh, then that's when the line comes out.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I was getting to.
Yeah, I can accept that. But even then I might be willing to argue a little bit, because I think, again, that's part of my charm, is just saying, well, do you really want a man you can open up with and feel safe with, regardless of the differences? I mean, do I really need to vote just like you every time?
Yeah.
Or wouldn't it be more fun to just safely share our thoughts with one another politically?
Yeah.
And some couples can do that, and some couples can't.
And the ones that can't will never go up to the next rung in intimacy. And
exactly.
So it's like that relationship has no chance unless you want to live in a relationship where it's, I mean, to me, it seems like if you live at that level of intimacy, it's almost like the titillation where it kind of becomes same old.
Or and my compulsive neediness is what drives me into her arms, because I just can't imagine life without somebody in it, and she's there, and all I have to do is kiss her ass, and then we can be together.
Yeah.
And that's not really sustainable over time, because I'm going to be losing my identity, and every woman knows, oh, he's doing that because he can't stand to be apart from me, or he can't stand to not have me. And he's that needy and desperate. And then we run smack into the wall of the fact that no woman can love a man she does not respect.
Yeah. I know that firsthand.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, honestly, we all do, because I think all men have proved disappointing to someone out there at some point in their lives. And that's true in vice versa as well. But men seem to be more willing to, I would say men value respect, I think, in a different way. I think that's the best way I could say it. So, yeah, and I think that has to do with sex, believe it or not, because I think her experience of sex includes penetration, invasion of her body, and leaving behind DNA souvenirs. Yeah, Stevening was here. And for her, if she doesn't respect me, that's really like getting slimed. And it's awful. I would think it would be awful. But for, and for him, whether he respects her or not in that same way, I don't think is so much the issue in terms of enjoying sex.
Yeah. So let's go back to the, so say you do share the thing about the movie. I don't like the movie. She likes the movie. It's safe to say that everything's cool. Then you move up to the next rung, next thing that comes up, and you go higher up.
Well, and the next rung on that would be, let's just make it very organic. The next, oh, why not? Why didn't you like it? And then you share what you didn't like about it. And is that okay? Or is that a bone for contention? Are we going to argue about that?
All right.
And then, and he says to her, after sharing his point of view up another rung of the ladder, how are you able to enjoy it with that, happening in the movie? Oh, well, and then she says something that is vulnerable. I just never really thought about, that problem in that way. And it really doesn't, it's never bothered me. You've really given me something to think about. And now she's being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Or she says, well, I've never really cared about that. If she says something like, the man's feelings in a rom-com really are irrelevant to me. It's really my fantasy and I just want what I want. And he feels put off, and he shares that he feels put off. Her date, that is, feels put off, and he shares, well, that doesn't seem right. That seems like your fantasy includes men not being as significant in the relationship as women. Well, it's just a fantasy. It's not the way I want to live my life, she shares back with. And so these conversations can have numerous rungs going up the ladder, right? As we get to know each other. It's not like, oh, I'm this fragile little thing, and if you trip that tripwire, it's over, baby.
Yeah.
It's not like that. And even I would add the pleasure of getting to know somebody who is really not right for me. It's still a pleasurable thing, so it doesn't have to be met with this end of the conversation. It's over. I'm going home. Here's $20 for a cab. See ya.
Yeah.
It could actually be this enjoyable adventure down into an alternate way of being human, and then saying, well, at the end of the evening, it's really fun getting to know you, but I can see this wouldn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how could you say that? Well, I've just never felt comfortable with cannibalism. And, and so whatever it is, I think people give up and they wimp out way too early, when there's actually a lot of pleasure to be gained from getting to know another human being so much more deeply.
Is that like a fear of intimacy that people have, or is that like
being judged, being rejected, and actually rejected not just as a potential romantic interest, but being rejected as a despicable human being. I can't believe you said that. That's horrible. And she throws her drink in your face, and everybody in the restaurant stares at you. What did he say? It's like, humiliation. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? And now she's going to tell everybody in her friend group on Facebook all about, what a horrible human being I am. And oh my God, we work together, and now everybody at work is going to hear. So it's, it can be fraught, a relationship can be fraught with numerous pitfalls that are quite fearsome, right?
Yeah.
That's why establishing intimacy, the ability to safely share our lives with one another, is important. I think it's okay too to preemptively ask, so what are the rules? She says, well, did you like the movie? To say, well, I'd like to talk about that, but first I'd like to know, are you the kind of person who really wants to know what I think, or are you the kind of person who really needs me to think what you think? And a lot of women would be offended at that, but a lot of women would laugh, or they might be curious and say, well, why would you ask me that? And well, my last relationship was blah, blah, blah. And then there's the laughter. No, of course, I just want to know what you think. So, we can take these rungs of the ladder in any direction we want. This is the weirdest ladder, because instead of being basically two-dimensional with an up and a down, it's multi-dimensional, where there are several different ways to take the conversation, and many of them lead to a far deeper intimacy. And that's just over sharing a movie together.
Yeah, but you're always going up. And so one topic could be one rung, and that could have multiple things within that one rung.
Multiple rungs within the rung. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So say you go from movie, then you go to history, then you go to spirituality, then you go to sex. And it's like each one of these things you're going up and up and up. But within each rung, there's all this other stuff kind of that is building it as well. So what is that doing for the relationship when you're building a relationship that way? Is it just like you're just creating like the ultimate safety? And does that mean that both people feel so safe they just fall in love more and more, and they just release more of themselves into it?
Well, I like this saying I heard in an AA meeting, that there is no defense against unconditional love. So if it's truly safe and the other person is conveying what Carl Rogers called positive regard, what you and I would call love, well, it's safe and they keep loving me and they want to know more and more of me. There's no defense against that. Why would I bail out? It's getting more and more wonderful, deeper and deeper. It's really great. And basically it's sort of, I can do no wrong with this person.
Yeah.
They just really appreciate who I am. And I have to say, the same things that were so appreciated and accepted by one person could be the exact opposite of what the next person feels, or what they think is right and wrong, and the way they can accept or reject me. And so that's why we do look for partners, and that's why we need to be discerning and be thinking and intentional about romance, because a lovely person is willing to share my company and even maybe falls in love with me, that is not grounds for making a commitment. I really need to get to know them much more deeply than we commonly do in our society, right? And that getting to know each other has to be really intentional. And the only thing, it's not a duty or an obligation only, it's also a really fun activity. So it's part of being an adult and finding out if the other person is an adult. And part of being an adult, I think, is becoming tolerant and accepting that we all have differences and that those are kind of intriguing and interesting instead of deal breaker.
Yeah.
You know,
have you ever had it where you were dating someone where you're going up and up the ladder, but then there was kind of a deal breaker that was looming like in your head maybe?
Well, no, not in my head, but I mean, I've generally been pretty accepting and open, but I've certainly been rejected plenty of times. So yeah, obviously it wasn't the right.
So you were building it, you were going up, and then all of a sudden it's just like, yeah, no.
Yeah. And it's complicated. And I appreciate Edward O. Wilson, the famous scholar from Harvard, who opined that psychology is actually the most complicated science and that will be the last one to ever be mastered by the human race, because the number of variables is, approaching a level where he said we are very, very far off from having the computational ability to really comprehend all these variables. So just the difference between you and one woman, or one woman, and let's say you were a total cad and you dated her sister, and after you dated her, two sisters can be so dramatically different that you could have an entirely different outcome, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to predict this, but I think in our conversation, the big takeaway is with laddering up intimacy is you don't go for full disclosure on the first date. You take your time, like stupid questions like, well, what's your favorite color? What sign are you, or whatever it is that people feel is safe enough to ask. And then to gradually work one's way up, because trust is something that is organic. It needs to have a chance to develop. And we're not all safe when we meet a stranger. We are at varying levels of safety. We don't know what's going to come out of their mouth or what kind of behavior they're going to engage in. And it could be very risky.
Yeah.
So taking your time, but understanding at the same time that we must press on, because intimacy is not something that is static and can be allowed to remain at one level. It has to always be growing. So and it doesn't have to be growing like the way Nazis marched into Belgium. I mean, it's got to be growing organically, and, the way any living thing grows in this world. And little by little, we get to know this other person.
Yeah. Yeah. I had something where I was in a relationship or kind of casual thing with a woman with 2 kids and building it pretty high. And then it got to the kid thing and I couldn't get over it. And I feel like that, like looking back at it, that was like the rung on the ladder that was next, I feel like. And I wasn't able to like be there because of just, it felt overwhelming to me. And
developmentally, you just weren't ready to approach being a step parent, or?
Yeah. It just felt like a lot. I mean, it was to me, it was a lot of that. And I mean, that for one, and then also I feel like it would have been like a whole change of lifestyle.
Well, that's a huge consideration. But for me, in terms of intimacy, okay, here's a awful one to be in the position of. You meet her, she's fantastic. You really get along. You really want to get to know her more. And you meet the kids. And at first, it's all cool. But over time, you realize you really don't like Johnny.
Yeah.
Or that Susie, his little sister, is really annoying to you, and you don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And you still really like mom, but you realize, I don't think I could face, years of living with these children, feeling the way I feel. And you've been repressing your true feelings about the kids because you didn't want to be that guy, who said, well, I hate your kids, because that would be pretty much the end of everything. So to be able to find, and this takes some real thinking, to find a way for us to safely share our feelings about each other's families. Where for her, maybe it's easy, where she's met your parents. I love your parents.
Yeah.
But if she met all your friends and your parents and your brothers and sisters? I mean, is she going to love them all equally? That just beggars belief for me. And for you, the idea that you would feel exactly the same way. You'd love everybody associated with her. So how do we begin to share dangerous truth with one another?
Yeah.
Unwelcome truth. A truth that is true and it's important and it needs to be factored into our navigation of the relationship, and certainly taking it to like anything like a big commitment. But at some point to be honest that, not that I don't like them, but I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how you do the parenting thing. And she's going to have a response to that. And for me, it was the other way around because I had children.
Yeah.
And my ex reminded me after our divorce, well, it's not easy, being a single parent. And she looked at me like I didn't know that. And because I had the children every other week. And it was, I'm aware of that. It's a bit of a challenge, but I love it. And she looked at me like I'd grown horns or something. And men are single parents too sometimes. But to get to a point where instead of being the all-knowing, I can do anything kind of a man, to be able to say, I don't know how you do this. I can't even imagine being a dad, much less a stepdad.
And I had a lot of those conversations.
Did you? How did those go over?
She was very receptive to it. Like,
to your openness?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that was cool.
Yeah. It was, well, I was being like completely honest. Like I couldn't not hide it, and also the fact, I mean, just career wise and work wise too, it seemed like it just feels like a lot to take on. I mean, again, it's like,
it would have been. Yeah. It would have been. Was it a lot to take on just in terms of your dating relationship?
Dating was like an easy dating. It was one of those things that was very simple, but I only knew that side of her. So it's like, I knew the side of her without the kids. So it's like, I almost like only got one version of her. She wasn't whole with me, I guess. That's kind of like looking back, it seems to be.
So like her without children would have been great. Yeah,
we would have been dating. Right. And we've talked about that too. We've had all those discussions, but then it was just, and it wasn't anything against the kids. It was just something I could not get through. And I think you need to get through that on your own. And I wasn't willing to go into the relationship and commit to it.
Because you hate children?
No, because
children in general, I mean.
No, yes, because I hate kids. That's right. I hate kids, everybody. No, it's because I felt like if I got committed in that mindset, like I needed to get clear on that. And I feel like I was able to get clear on it over since we're not together, I felt like I was able to get clear on it after the fact.
Yeah, that's another thing, I think all of us intuitively know that I can desensitize to things that at first are overwhelming. But then there are other things where, do I want to get desensitized to this? And there are still other things that, oh, no way in hell am I ever going to get desensitized to that horrible little brat, And so it's challenging. It's so complicated. Yeah. That's why I brought up Edward O. Wilson, because it is so very complicated. And so much of your dating her, getting to know her kids is really about predicting what's going to happen down the road. Do you predict that eventually you'll figure it out? Eventually you'll get comfortable with it? Or do you predict that you won't? And it's hard. And then how much of her life do you take up while you're figuring that out? Yeah.
Well, now looking back, if I did it again, I would just do it and try it and then
break the little children's hearts later when you leave them.
Well, I would be close to doing we'd be having discussions about it. I'd be expressing if it is becoming too much for me, I would bring it up early as possible. I wouldn't repress it and not say the thing.
Well, I remember, I'll tell you an embarrassing story of my own experience with my current wife. We've been together 30 years. Her son was 3 years old, only a beautiful little 3-year-old when I met him. but he was very needy because he had had his mother to himself his whole life and was really resentful of this new man in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And he would push her if she hugged me, or he would do something to get attention that was, as a 3-year-old, you can imagine, sometimes destructive, like pounding something hard on a expensive countertop and causing damage. And she would smile at me and say something super gentle to rebuke him, and I might do something super gentle, but on the inside, my like fingernails are scratching at my organs, and I'm having a really hard time with this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but neither one of us were being particularly honest.
Mm-hmm.
Until the day he came up and pushed her especially hard while I was giving her a hug. And I reached around and very carefully gave his muscles a little squeeze, like a pinch, but not a pinch of the skin, but of the muscle. And I think it was on his shoulder, or maybe it was on his hand. I can't remember. And there was this huge intake of breath where he gathered himself for the biggest scream of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he let loose with this howl. And she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, pointing at me, like the DA in the Perry Mason episode, "He hurt me." And and she looked up she was down on her knees at this point, looking her son in the eye. And she looked up at me adoringly and said, "Well, I'm sure he didn't mean to." And I, to my credit, and I'm not very often brave, I said, "Well, actually, I have to plead guilty. I did. And I'm embarrassed about that." And she then rescued me again. And she said, well, she stood up and she said, "Well, I know he can be really hard sometimes." And I said, "No, in terms of intimacy and laddering up disclosures," I said, "You know what? It's not him. He's acting like a typical 3-year-old who's a little jealous over his mom's giving somebody else attention that he thought was all his. I'm really kind of angry with you." And that was really hard for me to say.
Mm-hmm.
I had never said that in any dating relationship ever before.
Yeah.
And she, to her credit, she leaned into me, maybe even taking a step closer to me, and said something like, "Well, that's really intriguing. Tell me about that." And so I ended up telling, her, and I said, "It seems like we're both working so hard at not paying attention to the elephant in the room. And when he's misbehaving, I don't want to show that I'm being impatient, and you don't want to distract me in my loving adoration of you by demonstrating that's a problem." And she agreed that was the issue. And I said, "What I need from you is to be more of a parent and to, set some boundaries with him in terms of his behavior." And she said, "Well, what do you suggest?" And we
Another rung.
Yeah. And we just kept going. And I admitted to her I was afraid of becoming the therapist. I didn't want to be in that top dog position with her. And I declined making a suggestion. And she pressed me again. And I said, "Well, if it were me, I would probably go to a bookstore and get a book on parenting." And she said, "Let me borrow the keys to your car." And she left. And she did that. And she came back with a really good book. And she read it very quickly and started instituting change. But it never would have happened without those fearsome steps up that ladder. And I was really afraid. And I don't know that it didn't feel like maybe the right time to share it, but I think in hindsight, she had given me enough love and affirmation that I was pretty confident she wasn't going to judge me.
Yeah.
And she wasn't going to reject me out of hand. And that she could see that this man that I was was troubled, but he was trying to be honest and work it through. And so with that good faith effort on both of our parts, it was like a dream come true. I mean, it was like an amazing experience, and that with an amazing outcome and sort of a harbinger of the future for us, because we were able, I don't know if there was anything. I mean, I don't think there was anything after that that was as hard as that one day. But boy, was that scary doing that whole thing. And I think I was 40 years old when that happened, and it was still really scary. And I'm guessing it was probably scary for her, but maybe not as scary. But she and I have continued to ladder up our intimacy since then. And now I tell her things that I didn't even know were true about me 30 years ago, 20 years ago, because I'm still discovering myself. I'm still getting to know myself and what's important to me. I'm still exploring my vulgar sense of humor and making remarks to her that I would never make in a million years to any other woman. And sometimes she really laughs, and sometimes she rolls her eyes in impatience and frustration, but it's safe nevertheless, because I know I am not going to get rejected here. No matter how politically incorrect my humor was, or vulgar it was, or whatever other line I've crossed, I'm not going to cross a line into the zone of unforgiveness. And she's the same way. I know she has that same confidence, because, and then now we're at this point where I can't even imagine at this point, we have so much trust built up that if she did virtually anything, that it would be an occasion for it to be a deal breaker for me. It'd be an occasion for a confrontation. I can imagine lots of things like that. But I can't imagine anything where I would judge her and walk away, or she would judge me and walk away.
Well, I think that's a good way to end, and that's a good way to leave the listener of what you can build if you go up one rung at a time and explore those rungs individually and just go deeper and deeper and deeper and get to this level.
Well, and I will say, in regard to the, we did that podcast on going voice sober. We did most of our getting to know each other in over a 3-month period of time of daily phone contact before we ever met. So we had already covered so much self-disclosure and again, taking huge risks on the phone, but it was sort of okay, because I realized the secret is understanding that it's always a miracle when we find love, and that being able to hold each relationship loosely, understanding that miracles don't happen every day, that most of the time it's not going to work out. So that for me felt very encouraging to take even more risks.
Great. So we're going to wrap up here. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you could visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form.
These questions are always hard.
Well, we'll see about this one. This one's going to really put your feet to the fire, maybe. But you always do a good job answering them, I feel like.
Well, but it always, even though I'm not talking to a client, I know there's a human being out there who asked that question, and it costs me something to tell them a painful truth. But I think that's what the consumer needs to expect from their therapist, that we're paying you for this trouble that it takes, not just professionally, but emotionally. So what is that damn question anyway?
So this one's, hi, Steve. My girlfriend grew up in a really religious family, but thankfully she is no longer part of that church or believes in what she now sees as the indoctrination and abuse she was submitted to as a kid. She is open about talking about her history. However, sex seems to be the final frontier of her recovery. Why is sex the hardest part of the brainwashing to shed? And what do you think would help her feel more comfortable with sex and sexual topics?
Well, again, another wonderful question. And I think it is the hardest because it's the most personal. It's the most vulnerable that we really get with someone we're close to. So, yeah, And I think that the taboos that exist in religion and religiosity and in cults, the taboos that do exist around sexuality are the most strictly enforced and the most heartfelt in terms of condemnation and in terms of hurt and exclusion from the group. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of I have a lot of understanding for anybody who's going through this. But again, this is similar to the last question we had from a listener. I can be the therapist or the boyfriend, but I can't be both. So if my partner has a real problem with sexuality, I can be supportive, I can be a good listener, I can be kind, I can do a lot of things, but I can't really be there in all ways if what she needs is to journey much farther on her own path in terms of maybe getting some therapy or being able to talk to even some close women friends, about, I feel uncomfortable when he does this, or I think about doing that, but I just never can bring myself to doing that, even though I want to. And I think being able to sort that out isn't something that one's partner should take on their shoulders. I think it's something that we can express some compassion and some empathy for. I see you really struggling with this, and I feel bad for you that that's a problem. What do you think you should do? Is what I would say. And I would also be honest about the things that, for me, I would hate to think I'm in a relationship where it's going to be that way forever. And I'd like to have something more solid than just abstract hope, to pin my future on. So what are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
Because that's important to me. Like something as simple and as human as a couple who are physically, sexually intimate, not where one of them is not comfortable undressing in front of the other. I think that's a problem. If we're thinking, oh, we're going to have sex, but I can't let you see me naked. I think that is really a problem. And I think most of us would agree with that. Certainly all right-thinking people would agree. And so, how do we get over that? What's going on with that? And I think that's any of these discomforts are readily amenable to talk therapy. I don't think they're necessarily deal breakers, but if I were the partner, I would probably slow my roll enough to say, and I don't think I want to go forward with commitments until we do figure this out, until you do experience a more comfortable level of freedom, with your body and our mutual shared sex life.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thank you for the question. Thank you, Steve. And that's a wrap for this week. And we'll see you all next time.
Next time it is.